There's a strange thing that happens to a lot of gardeners in August. The tomatoes are still coming in. The zucchini is doing whatever zucchini does when you turn your back for a week. And it feels, honestly, like the growing season is somewhere near its peak. So the idea of planting anything new in the middle of all that summer abundance feels almost backwards. I made that exact mistake for years. I'd let August slide by. Tell myself I'd start thinking about fall once September rolled around. And then find myself in October wondering why my neighbor had a garden full of kale and I had a few sad, frost-bitten tomato vines and nothing else. What I didn't understand yet was that August isn't the end of the growing season. For a whole category of vegetables, it's actually the beginning of a second one, depending on where you live. August is when you plant for fall cool season crops that don't mind and sometimes actually prefer cooler weather settling in as they mature. If you're in a warmer, southern climate, you've got more room to work with. If you're further north, you'll want to lean toward the faster growing options and get them in the ground earlier in the month rather than later. Since an early frost can cut things short, I want to be honest about something before we get into the list, because it'll save you some frustration. Not every vegetable on this list behaves the same way depending on where you're gardening. Someone in Georgia has a meaningfully longer runway before frost than someone in Minnesota, and that difference matters more in August than at almost any other point in the year, because you're racing a clock that's different for everyone. So as we go through these, I'll flag which ones are more forgiving of a late start and which ones really want to go in early in the month. Today, I want to walk you through 15 vegetables that are worth getting into the ground this month. Some of these you'll be eating by October. Others are a longer-term project that'll reward you well into the cooler months ahead. Let's get into it. No. 1. Bush beans. I'll start with this one, because it's often the last chance of the year to get a crop of green beans before frost puts an end to things. Bush beans grow fast. And that speed is exactly why they belong on an August planting list. Sow the seeds directly into the soil, about an inch deep, in a spot that gets full sun. They don't ask for much beyond consistent watering, especially while the seedlings are getting established in whatever late summer heat is still lingering. Most varieties are ready to harvest in around 50 to 60 days, which puts you right around late September to early October, depending on when you plant. My tip, check your average first frost date before committing to this one. If you're in a northern climate with an early frost, you'll want to get these in the ground in the very first days of August, not the last. If you're gardening somewhere with a longer fall, like much of the South, you actually have room for a second succession planting 2 to 3 weeks after the first, which stretches your harvest window out considerably instead of getting everything all at once. No. 2. Beets. Beets have always struck me as one of the more patient, forgiving vegetables you can plant for fall. And August is really their sweet spot. Sow seeds directly, about half an inch deep, spaced a couple of inches apart. Then thin the seedlings once they come up so the roots have room to swell properly. Beets like full sun and soil that's been loosened up a bit, since compacted ground makes it harder for that round root to develop its shape. They're ready to harvest in around 50 to 60 days. And a light frost late in the season actually tends to sweeten the flavor rather than hurt the plant. My tip, don't toss the greens. Beet tops are genuinely good sautéed. So you're getting 2 vegetables out of 1 planting. No. 3. Carrots. Carrots planted in August have a real advantage that a lot of people don't realize. The cooling weather as they mature tends to produce a sweeter, more tender root than a carrot rushed through the heat of summer. Sow seeds directly into loose, well-worked soil, since rocky or compacted ground will give you stunted, forked roots instead of the long, straight ones you're picturing. Keep the soil consistently moist while the seeds germinate, which can take a couple of weeks, and tests your patience more than most vegetables on this list. From there, you're looking at about 70 days to maturity. So this is one you'll want to get in early in the month. My tip: mulch lightly once the seedlings are up, which helps keep the soil temperature more even and cuts down on the weeding you'll otherwise be doing all season. One thing worth knowing: if this is your first time direct sowing carrots, the seeds are tiny and slow to germinate compared to almost everything else on this list. So it's easy to assume nothing's happening and give up too early. Mark the row clearly and be patient. It's normal for 2 full weeks to pass with what looks like no progress at all before those thin, feathery seedlings finally show up. No. 4. Broccoli. Broccoli is one of those vegetables that genuinely prefers cooler weather, which makes it a natural fit for an August planting rather than something you'd typically start in spring heat. Rather than starting from seed this late in the season, I'd recommend picking up transplants from a garden center and setting them into the ground, spaced about 18 inches apart, in a spot with full sun. Keep the soil consistently moist. And don't be surprised if growth looks slow at first. Broccoli takes its time before that central head really starts to form, usually somewhere around 80 to 100 days from transplanting. My tip: once you harvest the main head, leave the plant in the ground. Most varieties will keep producing smaller side shoots for weeks afterward, which is a pleasant bit of bonus harvest. A lot of first-time growers don't expect. No. 5. Cabbage. Cabbage is a long-season crop, which is exactly why August planting works so well for it by the time the head is ready. Cooler fall weather has usually settled in, and cabbage genuinely handles a light frost without complaint. Set out transplants rather than starting from seed at this point in the season, spacing them about a foot to 18 inches apart depending on the variety, in a bed with full sun and rich, well-drained soil. Water consistently, since inconsistent watering is one of the more common reasons cabbage heads split before they're ready to harvest. Expect somewhere around 70 to 90 days from transplanting to a full head. My tip: keep an eye out for cabbage worms on the undersides of the leaves. They're easy to miss until the damage is already done. So, a quick check every few days goes a long way. No. 6. Cauliflower. Cauliflower has a reputation for being a bit fussier than its cousins. And honestly, that reputation is fair, but an August planting timed for fall harvest tends to go more smoothly than a spring attempt, since it avoids the sudden heat that can cause the head to button, meaning it forms small and premature. Instead of developing properly, use transplants. Set about 18 inches apart, in full sun with rich, consistently moist soil. Once the head starts to form, some varieties benefit from having the outer leaves tied loosely over the top to keep it pale and tender, a process called blanching, though a lot of newer self-blanching varieties handle this on their own. You're generally looking at 75 to 90 days to harvest. My tip: check on the developing head every few days once it starts forming, since cauliflower can go from not quite ready to past its prime faster than you'd expect. No. Kale. Kale might be the single most forgiving vegetable on this entire list, and it's one I'd point any nervous first-time fall gardener toward. Sow seeds directly or set out transplants, about a foot apart, in full sun to partial shade. It tolerates a wide range of soil conditions and, remarkably, actually improves in flavor after being touched by frost, developing a sweeter taste as the plant responds to the cold. You can start harvesting outer leaves in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, well before the plant is fully mature, and it'll keep producing new growth from the center for months. My tip: harvest from the outside in, taking the oldest, largest leaves first and leaving the young center growth intact. And a single planting will keep feeding you well into winter in many climates. Kale is also one of the more forgiving choices if your August has gotten away from you and you're planting later than you'd planned. Because it tolerates cold so well, even a planting pushed into early September can still deliver a real harvest before winter fully sets in. Which isn't true of everything on this list. No. 8. Collard greens. Collards share a lot in common with kale. But there's a slightly different, milder flavor and a broader, sturdier leaf that a lot of southern gardeners in particular have grown up cooking with. Sow seeds directly or use transplants. Spaced about 18 inches apart. In full sun and fertile soil, like kale. Collards handle cold weather well and actually taste better after a frost softens some of their natural bitterness. Harvest begins around 50 to 75 days from planting. Though you can start pulling individual outer leaves earlier than that if you're eager. My tip, this is one of the more heat-tolerant greens on the list too. So if you're in a warmer southern climate, you've got a wider planting window in August than some of the others here. No? 9. Swiss chard. Swiss chard has always felt like the vegetable equivalent of a reliable friend. It's not flashy, but it shows up consistently and rarely lets you down. Sow seeds directly about half an inch deep, thinning seedlings to around 6 inches apart once they're established. In full sun to partial shade. It's genuinely one of the more heat and cold-tolerant vegetables you can grow, handling both the lingering warmth of late summer and the first real chill of fall without much fuss. You can begin harvesting outer leaves in as little as a month, and the plant will keep producing new growth from the center for the rest of the season. My tip, the colorful stem varieties. The ones with red, orange, or yellow stalks taste identical to the plain green kind. So pick based on whichever looks nicest in your garden bed. No. 10. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi tends to confuse people the first time they see it, that pale, round bulb sitting right at soil level, with leafy stems shooting out in every direction, but it's a genuinely easy, quick-growing crop for a fall garden. Sow seeds directly or use transplants, spaced about 6 inches apart. In full sun with well-drained soil. It's a fast one. Generally ready to harvest in about 50 to 60 days, which makes it a solid choice, even if you're getting a slightly late start in August. The bulb has a mild flavor, somewhere between a turnip and the core of a broccoli stem, and it can be eaten raw or cooked. My tip, harvest when the bulb is about the size of a tennis ball. Left too long, it turns woody and loses the crisp texture that makes it worth growing in the first place. No. 11. Lettuce. Lettuce is a plant that genuinely struggles in the peak heat of summer, bolting to seed and turning bitter almost overnight once temperatures climb too high, which is exactly why late August, as things start to cool, is such a good window for a fresh planting. Sow seeds directly, very shallowly, since lettuce seed needs light to germinate well, or use transplants for a head start. Keep the soil consistently moist, and provide a bit of afternoon shade if your August is still running hot. Leaf lettuce varieties can be ready in as little as 30 days, while head-forming types take closer to 60 days. My tip, succession planting works beautifully here. Sow a small new row every couple of weeks through late summer instead of one big planting, and you'll have fresh lettuce coming in steadily rather than all at once. No. 12. Spinach. Spinach is another cool season crop that genuinely resents summer heat, bolting quickly when it's too warm, which makes an August planting timed for cooler weather ahead. One of the better windows of the whole year for it. Sow seeds directly about half an inch deep, in full sun to partial shade, keeping the soil consistently moist through germination. It's a relatively fast crop, often ready for a first harvest of baby leaves within 3 to 4 weeks. And it tolerates a real cold snap once established. Sometimes, surviving light freezes with the right protection. My tip, a floating row cover over the bed once temperatures start dropping in fall, will extend your harvest window considerably, letting you keep picking fresh spinach well after other crops have called it quits for the year. Spinach also happens to be one of the more nutrient-dense crops you can grow. And there's something satisfying about pulling a fresh handful for a salad in late October when most of the garden has already gone quiet for the season. No. 13 radishes. Radishes might be the single fastest vegetable on this entire list. And if you want a quick, satisfying win in the garden this month, this is where I'd point you. Sow seeds directly, about ½ inch deep, spaced an inch or two apart. In full sun, they genuinely don't ask for much beyond consistent moisture. And most varieties are ready to harvest in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, which means you could plant a round in early August and be eating them before the month is even fully over. My tip, because they're so fast. Radishes are a great crop to tuck into gaps between slower-growing vegetables like broccoli or cabbage. They'll be harvested and out of the way long before those larger plants need the extra room. No, fiats in turnips. Turnips do double duty in a fall garden, giving you both a root vegetable and a genuinely tasty set of greens from the same planting, which makes them one of the more efficient choices on this list. Sow seeds directly about ½ an inch deep, thinning to around 4 inches apart once seedlings emerge. In full sun. They're relatively fast growers, with the greens ready to harvest in as little as 30 days and the roots following a few weeks after that, generally around 50 to 60 days total. Like beets. A bit of cool fall weather right before harvest tends to improve the flavor of the root rather than hurt it. My tip, harvest the roots when they're still on the smaller side, around the size of a golf ball to a tennis ball. Since larger, older turnips tend to turn woody and lose some of their mild, sweet flavor. No, visitos tapeas. I've saved peas for last because they're a bit of an unusual case. Most people associate them with spring. But a second planting in August, timed for a fall harvest, is a genuinely underused trick that a lot of experienced gardeners rely on. Sow seeds directly about an inch deep, providing a trellis or some kind of support for climbing varieties in full sun. Peas actually prefer cooler weather to the heat of midsummer. So an August planting timed to mature as temperatures drop tends to produce a sweeter, more tender pea than a rushed spring crop fighting early heat. Expect somewhere around 60 days to harvest. Depending on the variety, my tip, water consistently while the seedlings are getting established in whatever late summer warmth remains, since peas are more sensitive to heat stress in those first couple of weeks than they are once they're mature and the weather has properly cooled. It's worth choosing a variety bred with a shorter days to maturity window for this particular planting, rather than whatever you might have used in spring. Since you're working against the calendar, in a way spring planting doesn't require it. So there you have it, 15 vegetables. All of them well suited to going into the ground this month. Whether you're working with the last real burst of summer warmth or getting an early jump on the cooler weather just ahead, if I had to boil this whole list down to one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't treat August like the tail end of your growing season. Treat it like the start of a second one. A patch of bare soil in your garden right now isn't a sign that the year is winding down. It's an open invitation, and one that a lot of gardeners let pass by without realizing what they're missing. If you're not sure where to start, I'd suggest picking a mix rather than committing to just one type. A few fast ones, like radishes or lettuce, so you get an early win in a few weeks. A couple of the sturdier greens like kale or Swiss chard, since they'll keep producing well into the colder months. And maybe one longer season project like cabbage or broccoli, something you plant now and look forward to as the weather really turns. I'd also gently push back on the idea that a fall garden is somehow more work than what you were already doing all summer. In a lot of ways, it's less. The pests that give you the most trouble in June and July have largely moved on by the time these crops are maturing. The weeds slow down as the weather cools. And you're not out there watering twice a day just to keep things from wilting in the heat. If anything, I've come to think of the fall garden as the more relaxing half of the year, not the more demanding one. If you've planted a fall garden before, I'd love to hear what worked for you. Drop a comment and let me know your state or USDA hardiness zone, and which of these 15 you're most excited to try this month. If this was helpful, hit subscribe. There's more practical, low-maintenance gardening advice coming, built around the same idea that a good garden doesn't stop just because summer's winding down. Welcome home to Easy Garden. I'll see you in the next one.